Good afternoon it is now, everyone. Sure is. All right. Well, welcome to Coverings, everyone. Day one. Hope it's off to a good start so far. It's always good to reconnect with good friends, and it's good each year to see a lot more sustainability folks in the attendance pool. So, a lot to talk about today. If you're intending to be in the session on embodied carbon, then you're in the right room. My name is Bill Greasy. I'm with the Tile Council of North America, TCNA, and it's a pleasure to moderate our session today. We've got an impressive lineup here. Immediately to my left, Mr. William Paddock, WAP Sustainability, one of the leading consultants in the field of sustainability, especially for the tile industry, has been a great partner for us over the years, especially to those that are right in his neighborhood in Tennessee. And I could go on and on about William's resume. He's sat on a lot of committees having to do with green building, carbon, but also attended a lot of conferences and workshops, and they're doing some pretty special things over there. And to William's left is Mr. Wes Sullins. He's the Director of Lead for U.S. Green Building Council. And there's a little bit of happenings over at USGBC. I think a whole new version of LEED might be one of them coming soon, and I know embodied carbon is a big part of that. So looking forward to seeing how this goes. And then Mr. Dan Marvin, who many of you know from Schluter Systems, has worked in all areas of the industry from tile production to cement and now a lot of other innovative solutions with Schluter. But most importantly is my Green Initiative chairman at Tile Council of North America, and has led us through this journey. Some of you may recall years ago, the tile industry, in the early 2000s, there was this thing coming up called green building, and we were thinking, yeah, no problem. Tile's green, sustainable, lasts a long time, made from dirt, baked in an oven. What's more sustainable than that? Well, little did we know we didn't need to rest on that. We needed to keep moving forward, keep being at the table, keep being part of the conversation. And so from that time forward, Dan was instrumental in forming our Green Initiative at TCNA, and we've accomplished quite a bit in for the tile industry being really at the table and in the middle of the conversation. So we're proud of that. So what we have in store today is an old school conversation. We're not going to give you PowerPoint paralysis. We're not going to give you death by 100 slides. What we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation on a very important topic, that topic being embodied carbon. And as you have probably seen, it's one of the leading topics in architecture and construction right now, but also in major procurement, not just in the built environment, but procurement in general with the federal government, with the Inflation Reduction Act. Federal procurement obviously has an impact also on private procurement and the entire private sector supply chain. So it's something near and dear to the tile industry's heart because we've been working on this for quite some time. So we're going to dive into that today. So without me teeing it up too much, I'm going to hand it over to William right now. If you want to just talk a little bit about, because you're in a lot of spaces, talk about the topic of embodied carbon in general and kind of how you see challenges, not just the tile industry, but overall, anyone having a deal in this space, but also opportunities. Mm-hmm. Just maybe some opening thoughts.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having us. I think, just to level set on the definition of embodied carbon is you have to think of buildings as like a collection of materials. It's not a single thing. It's a lot of things that lots of different manufacturers produce, and then it's all comes together in the form of a building. And I think if you recognize buildings that way as sort of these collections of materials, you recognize that the impacts in a building, especially on the materials, kind of comes one manufacturer at a time. What's purchased, installed, specified, how materials and design link together. These sort of are the tenets of where embodied carbon kind of enters the chat. Historically, I think embodied carbon is also like a success story in the whole in the context of a building. Originally, when green building initiatives were starting, energy efficiency was the primary motivator. Buildings were, your grandma's leaky home. They weren't they weren't tight building envelopes. They fairly inefficient. We were heating and cooling the air around the building in addition to the air in the building. And so energy efficiency was a big thing. And if you looked at that in terms of, what's the representation of energy efficiency and operational carbon to embodied carbon, operational carbon was way bigger. And then over the last 20, 30 years, buildings have become much more efficient than they have. We have all sorts of new products for that. I think we're a lot more educated around that. And what's happened is the impact of the building has shrunk, but the ratio of embodied carbon to operational carbon is actually balanced out. So about 50% of, here's the easy stat, is about 50% of the building's impact over its entire lifetime happens when it's built. So it becomes this really big opportunity, as if you can find ways to build buildings with less materials or lower carbon materials, you have this ability to really influence the total carbon of the building, in a period of whatever the construction cycle is, 1, 2, 3 years, depending on the complexity of the project. So that rhetoric has really caught on. I think people see that opportunity, and I think that's really what's happening now. Policy has gotten involved as the world's become a lot more climate aware. There's regulation in Europe, there's regulation in the US that's impacting different categories, there's regulation in California, and so this topic of embodied carbon just continues to escalate. And now we're seeing it, with which Wes will kind of highlight, is probably going to play a much more prominent role in the next iteration of LEED. So.
Yeah, I'll go to Wes in just a moment, but first I want to reiterate something because it's important from a definition standpoint, and you touched on energy, right? Yeah. The topic of carbon is directly related to energy in many ways, and so over the years we've looked at carbon in buildings from an operational, use the word operational. So that's been kind of the standard up until just a few years ago, was in building and construction, let's get buildings more efficient and operating more efficiently, which means a lower carbon footprint. Just maybe repeat one time the difference between operational carbon, and now we're looking at embodied carbon of materials, which is much different in how that's defined.
Yep. I mean, if we just take this room that we're in, the way we were looking at green building historically was essentially what's the lighting footprint, what's the air conditioning footprint, and any other sort of thing that consumes electricity, natural gas. We probably were thinking about water, recognizing it was smaller, but that was where our mind was. How do we make this space, use less energy? How do we make this space heat and cool itself better, hold and block out the sun, but hold on to the cool? That's where our mindset was. And now what we're saying is, hey, that's important too, but so are the ceiling tiles, and so is this carpet, and so is the furniture, and so is the lighting, and so are these, speaker doohickeys, and we're thinking about those things in terms of this space and all of those things. You kind of can flick your mind into like a matrix mode, like the green screen matrix. Like, I look around as somebody who measures carbon footprint of things, and I just see carbon. Like I see the room, and I could total this room up plus the operational carbon and think about it in a total carbon mindset. So we use a little formula. A building should really be broken down to operational carbon plus embodied carbon equals the total carbon of the building.
Great, thanks. So, yeah, Wes, now we're talking about embodied carbon now more and more. And so in addition to what William said from the building energy load, now we're looking at the materials used to make the building and what's their energy load. And that's the embodied carbon to make the materials, transport the materials, install the materials, use the materials, dispose of the materials. So maybe touch a little bit on kind of in your world, in the green building standardization world, what's coming or what you guys are doing to work with industry also.
Thanks for that. Thanks for having me. I do actually have a couple slides.
Great.
Like two. And this is a segue to what we're up to. So I work at the U.S. Green Building Council. We're a nonprofit that writes a rating system called LEED, along with other things we do. One of our committee members is in the audience right here. Brittany Mappé is one of our technical advisory group members for materials and resources, the credit category. But LEED is a 100-point scale rating system used to certify buildings that are green. And it does all those things you were talking about, William, energy efficiency and renewables and how you power your building. That's a big part of it, the climate impacts. But it also looks at indoor air quality and the water use in the buildings and the site around it and plants and things, how you get to the buildings. This is actually a LEED certified convention center, by the way, and it's got good daylight. The carpets got recycled content, for example. They used low carbon concrete years ago. It wasn't as low as you can get nowadays. But to get back to your question, we are seeing embodied carbon as a big driver for sustainability. It's probably the number one today beyond kind of renewables and energy. I think it's because a lot of governments and folks feel like they've sort of figured out the grid. Like they know they need to decarbonize energy. You know, they know how to, the renewables are getting cheaper. They're starting to get better energy generation. So now the next big source of emissions, as you were saying, is the embodied carbon. So we're actually right now writing a new rating system for LEED called version 5, which we haven't done in about 10 years. It's been 10 years, a little more, since we last did a major update. And so you see the timeline on our slide here. So right now, actually, we're in the middle of public comment. But what you'll see in that rating system is a big focus on embodied carbon. There's also a lot of focus on electrification of buildings and getting better clean energy and energy use and all those things, indoor air quality, et cetera. But for materials, the big change that's happening is we have a set of points and a requirement around embodied carbon, and then points for material optimization. We'll talk more about that as we get going. But the big takeaway here is that we have a public comment period open and would love all of your participation in that. And here's a QR code to go to. Those are my 2 slides. That's all we got. Just wanted to put the plug out there. We are looking for feedback and comments. You know, have we hit the mark? Are these the right topics? Are we writing credits that are doable but also push the market forward? And yeah, it's an exciting time.
Can you talk a little bit, Wes, just a follow-up question on kind of the collaborations you might be having in the realm of embodied carbon? So policymakers, industry, advocacy groups, you know, what's that look like in terms of involvement and engagement?
Yeah, we are directly connected with the White House, and here in the US, the feds. They have a lot of proposals for things like zero energy, zero carbon buildings, and we're talking with them directly on embodied carbon, how to make that part of their definition. We also work closely with the General Services Agency and the EPA. Those are folks that use LEED as a rating system quite a bit, and we're in conversation with them about aligning the metrics. The big one is the federal government has put out what they call their Buy Clean initiative, and they've also done a lot of funding for EPDs to kind of seed the market to get more environmental product declarations out there. They put something like $400 million out in grants and other programs. And they just committed, I think there was something on Friday, a press release about the federal government doubling down on requiring their government agencies to purchase green materials, of which a lot of those are embodied carbon. So kind of, that's one level. There's a lot of policy things moving and driving action. The other piece on collaboration, we're joining with a group of other groups that write rating systems and industry groups that set kind of standards for buildings and trying to coordinate around whole building life cycle analysis and EPDs and get the terminology consistent. Because right now it's kind of a Wild West, and we'll get into the weeds, I think. But when you write EPDs, they're kind of different depending on who's the person writing those or the organization in charge. And then when you're doing an analysis of your building, the whole building life cycle analysis it's called, those can be very different based on the software you use, the assumptions you make. So we are working with a group called the ECHO Project. It's the Embodied Carbon Harmonization and Optimization Project. It's a mouthful. And it's a bunch of groups that just got together and said, let's be more consistent on how we do this. We're all writing similar standards. Let's use the same words and make sure it's something that can be quantified similar.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we'll definitely come back. We got some more to talk about there. But before we do so, Dan, you want to talk a little bit about what embodied carbon means to us as the tile industry, and especially with the pressures at the federal level, but also in the private sector from the industry side, but also maybe what you're hearing from the design side and kind of what our conversations have been.
Yeah, good question, Bill. And I'll kind of preface this by saying if you're not involved with this at TCNA and want to get involved, I encourage you to do so. A lot of what I do as a manufacturer is driven by Bill getting excited about, hey, this new thing is coming, and talking to William about, hey, what is this thing? How do I react to it? And Wes, obviously the USGBC is a huge driver of a lot of these initiatives. So I really encourage you to come into our Green Initiative meetings. We happen to have one coming up in conjunction with a flooring summit that I'm sure Bill will tell you a little more about, that TCNA is kind of sponsoring along with the rest of the flooring industry. So definitely encourage you to get involved. And I say that because 15, 20 years ago, I really didn't know anything about any of this stuff and was reluctant to sort of engage, but the tile industry knew that we had to do a better job of reacting to what our customers are asking us for and what USGBC was asking us for, and there's a lot of different entities out there that are asking manufacturers for stuff. So to really narrow down to what stuff is it that really matters, you have to do a deeper dive. And I'll just say it, there's a lot of moving pieces to sustainability. If you're a manufacturer, for sure, you have to figure out, how am I going to optimize the money I spend, the time I spend, the resources I spend to get the biggest bang for the buck. And what we were waiting for years was sort of this crystallization of some of these ideas, because every certifier out there had a different idea of what they wanted to see in your building. You wanted to see, for a long time it was recycled content, and are you manufacturing real close to the building site? And then that's kind of lessened over time, and we've evolved into more of the environmental product declarations and health product declarations of the disclosure documents. And now we're more on a path to where we're not only disclosing, but we're optimizing. And I think we've all kind of seen this looming large like a train coming at us, where we not only have to talk the talk, but we have to start walking the walk. And for better or worse, it's here. So all of us in this room have to do a better job with the amount of carbon that we're emitting to hit these targets that have been set up by various government agencies and voluntary agencies. So to Bill's question, we don't get asked by USGBC what's in our stuff unless one of our customers asks them. So we are really, really reacting to requests from customers, be it distributors, be it big box stores, be it individual consumers, being building owners. Somebody somewhere has to say, hey, this is important to me. I really, really want to get LEED certified. I really, really want to know what your recycled content is. We get these big picture concepts all the way down to, do you have this specific thing in your product that I'm allergic to? So as a manufacturer, we're kind of reacting to all those different directions. But the nice thing is it's starting to crystallize, and one of the very, very key elements that's come out of all of this is this embodied carbon concept. The good thing is, the tile industry under Bill's direction has done a good job of getting EPDs, environmental product declarations, moving. We have the category rules it takes to get them created for all of our products, and that element, that carbon element, is part of that EPD document. I've rambled a bit, so hopefully that answered your question.
Well, yeah, let's follow up just a little bit on that, Dan, and then I'll come to William as somebody in the trenches with our industry. But speaking of EPDs, because this is critical if we want to talk the technicalities of embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is basically the global warming potential value from an environmental product declaration, which basically means we evaluated a product, the materials to make that product, mining those materials, shipping them to the factory, making the product, shipping it from the factory to the site, using the product, disposing of the product. What is all the energy consumed throughout that entire process, and that's our value per square meter of embodied carbon. And for the tile industry, based on our industry-wide EPD, that's roughly 19 kilograms per meter squared of CO2, greenhouse gas, our global warming potential, which is measured in carbon equivalents per square meter. So our biggest issue, and then maybe Dan, you can talk a little bit, but is this idea of how much, where does the burden of that energy come from? And it's in the manufacturing of tile, it's in the manufacturing stage, but where we really benefit is the longevity of tile really lowers the carbon footprint. But I don't know if you want to speak to the competitive disadvantage we're actually at.
The questions we get are a lot about, from cradle to it going out your door, what is that embodied carbon number? And for tile, certainly, because you're heating it up in a natural gas-fired kiln typically, there is embodied carbon in the product that isn't part of some of the other flooring choices out there. The discussion needs to then extend on past just, my factory out into it's being used, it's being installed, and then something. And that something is, for tile, it can stay there as long as the building's around if you want. You don't necessarily have to change it out for 75 years if you don't want to. The other flooring sectors want to kind of narrow it down to just that manufacturing part of it. So a lot of Bill's advocacy, a lot of my advocacy, a lot of the tile industry outreach has been to try to expand that discussion to, okay, it's got to go over the whole useful life of that product. Because if you're replacing a vinyl floor every 5 years, yeah, its initial embodied carbon may be lower, but then you're doing it 4 or 5 more times over the lifespan of what could be a single tile installation. So a lot of that discussion is where we get into the nuances of how these things are formulated, how they're being discussed, and how we react to them.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. You've kind of enabled me to get on my soapbox for just a moment, but to state it simply, if we're just looking at the carbon emissions from the factory, what we're basically doing is incentivizing manufacturers to make it cheaper, thinner, and weaker. We're basically creating a single-use society, just like plastic water bottles. We've gone this route before. You're going to consume less energy to make a product. That's great, but if that product's just going to be used and disposed of, what's the larger carbon impact of society over time? And so our position as the tile industry has been, hey, why don't we show the value of longevity? And we believe that we have a society today that truly appreciates quality and durability. And I use this example all the time. I have 2 little girls, 10 and 7. They don't take plastic water bottles to school. No, that's cheap. That's awful. They appreciate quality. They take their $45 Stanley mug to school. Yeah, it's a pretty color, but I think they also like durability, longevity, and it's cool to see, the up and coming population really starting to appreciate quality. And I think you see that in consumer products in general. So why not, to combat this, this discussion of, yeah, it may last forever, but it'll ugly out before it wears out. We don't have to live in a society like that. We never did before, if you look at history and the way we celebrate historic installations. So I'll get off my soapbox for a moment, but I do think at some point there's some accountability on the owner to select products that last long and then keep those products and appreciate those products.
And I think that's the right rhetoric. I mean, I'll add on to this. I mean, I think it's important, Wes is introducing this ECHO project of, like, we're trying to harmonize on just the terms. So I think, take that and with recognition that this idea and how to do embodied carbon is still, evolving. It's pretty immature at the moment. One thing that I think is useful to see, Dan mentioned, customer requests. I mean, a lot of manufacturers get asked about the carbon footprint of their product by, a customer or a buyer. If you kind of get into their head of what's going on with them, we have, publicly traded big tech companies and large fast casual restaurant chains that sell a bunch of coffee who have climate goals stated. It's in their investor relations documents. It's on the, 2 clicks away from the homepage on their website, usually saying something like, hey, we're going to reduce 50% of our carbon emissions by 2030 and then be carbon neutral by 2050. So these companies at the highest level, CEO sign-off, board approval, have committed themselves to these reduction targets. And buildings fall on the carbon accounting balance sheet. If they build, like data centers or new stores, it's on there. And so the carbon accounting regime says that whatever you buy in a course of a year goes on to your carbon balance sheet, if you will, for the 12-month period, whatever time frame you're reporting, usually a year. So if you bought, chairs or you bought flooring in that year, it shows up under Scope 3, Category 1, purchased goods and services. And so it's there. And so what a lot of these companies are looking at is, what did I buy before? And then I need to show that I'm buying a new version. The next thing I buy needs to have a lower footprint. And so a lot of our clients are looking for products that have a 3, 4, 5, 6% reduction target compared to what they bought previously. So this is just a side note, this is a really confusing part for manufacturers because different customers will have different numbers of what they're asking for. We have clients who say, I got an RFP that says I need to be 11 kilograms, but somebody else told me 8, and somebody else told me 4, and somebody else told me 6, and they're like, what does it need to be? And it's like, it needs to be whatever it is. You just may or may not be eligible for a specific company who's trying to show that reduction target down to that level, and that's where they need to be in order to show, the 6%ers are trying to get to 50% in less than 10 years, and the later it works, the later we get, closer to 2030, the higher the thresholds that people are going to look for are because they're trying to achieve this. To just add another level, California passed a bill that then makes all of that disclosure of a company's carbon footprint, including those Scope 3, Category 1, purchased goods and services, mandatory for organizations that are $1 billion or more and do business in California, which is 4,000 something companies not publicly traded. You can be publicly traded, but you can also just be big, and that's regulated. So you're going to just see more and more of that sort of reaching in. Long answer here, but to finish it out is products that last longer mean that you won't see that back on the balance sheet in future years. And I think this is really where, if you buy something that's low quality, has a lot of turnover, you're going to have to constantly fix it. Your carbon footprint's you're going to have it, then you're not, then you're going to have it again, then you're not, then you're going to have it again, versus have it once and have it, basically be able to be depreciated over the life of the building. So I think that motivation is useful to kind of frame.
William, when does the legislation that you're talking about in California go into effect?
It's scheduled for 2026.
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you, William. And I'm glad you touched on carbon accounting because it's a term we hear tossed around quite a bit, and it's good to know that there's actually a real professional approach to it these days because we've been saying for years it's not really any different from fiscal accounting. The goal is to have fewer things on the balance sheet, right? And for the things you have on the balance sheet to have a lower depreciation cost per year. And the way you get a lower depreciation cost per year is buy stuff that lasts longer. And if you, as an owner, and this is where I go back to, I think it's the responsibilities on the owner, if you go out and for some crazy reason decide to buy a new HVAC unit before you fully depreciated the one you already have, and now you got HVAC showing up on your sheet twice, one of them with a higher depreciation cost than the other, that's on you, that's on the owner. So just like that, if you're gonna, as an owner, assume a lower carbon burden up front, be prepared to pay higher carbon per year as long as you own that building. And so I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And I don't know, Wes, you're in the trenches with LEED in the development. I'm sure you're hearing this debate from all sides.
Yeah.
Maybe comment a little bit on what you're hearing from industry and where the big fights are.
This is a tricky one. I mean, first of all, the Stanley mugs also insulate really well, so they keep things cold for a long time, which you don't get with, anyway. There's a benefit beyond just the durability. They just perform better, which I think you can say with tile and such as well. But I will push back a little bit because we did a report with RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, last year, and found that 50 to 80% of embodied carbon is in those A1 to A3 phases. That's your extraction, harvesting, and manufacturing of a product. And then when you ship it and it gets installed, there's another bit. The use phase and replacement is another bit, but those are kind of farther off and harder to predict than the stuff that happens before it's sold. So in terms of like a carbon credibility or whatnot, like looking at impacts that have already occurred by the time you purchase something as a building owner, you're solid. You know that those are the impacts, those A1 to A3s, versus like how long somebody keeps it, does it go out of style before they replace it? That's stuff that's kind of in the future. That's like a greening grid. Maybe the electricity grid gets better in the future and you can predict that. But what's important for climate is to make those changes now, everyone, right? I'll say that. Okay, but on the other hand, you're not the only industry where this issue of durability or kind of the use phase is a big driver for embodied carbon. Insulation is the one we hear from quite a bit. So like when you go to buy an insulation for your building, say it's a home or something, you can choose like fiberglass or mineral wool or cellulose, which is like a paper-based, or you can do some kind of a foam spray or whatnot. Now the A1 to A3s, those upfront embodied carbon emissions are much higher when you look at the foams and the plastics to insulate. But that industry is saying, well, but they air seal better. They're better performance over the life of that building. They may even last longer. They last the life of the building, which is true for probably all those insulations. But as you'll see in LEED V5, if you go to our credit on reduced embodied carbon, one of our credits is a prereq actually, required to assess your embodied carbon compared to like industry averages. And we set the one for insulation at sort of a fiberglass or mineral wool level to kind of see if that industry, the foam industry, the plastics industry, can start to come down and meet those and even beat some of those. So there's a bit of a stretch there. But all that said, I totally get that durability is a big deal, and we don't want flimsy products that are yanked out in just a few years. So it's, and to William's point, it's an evolving thing. We are in the infancy. I mean, embodied carbon 5 years ago was not something that investors was even on their radar.
No, it wasn't on their
at
radar.
all. But now, today, it's the flashy object.
Mm-hmm. And it's tricky too there too, because like what I was referencing in terms of carbon accounting is a year-to-year thing, right? Like, what happens in 2024, 2025. The complexity of translating that in the building is these building projects run multi-years. Yeah. They span multiple carbon accounting periods. So, the design stage versus the specification stage versus the construction stage are all happening almost in different calendar years, which makes it tricky to figure out how you can kind of influence that, and at what point do you actually have data to drive these decisions?
Yeah, very important. Yeah, how can that data be used to drive actions?
Yeah, speaking of data, Dan, we've been on this journey together since the beginning, right, of green initiatives for the tile industry. And maybe can you just reflect a little bit on kind of when we first developed EPDs, we were just trying to hand somebody a document that no one read, but we could check off the box that we had one. But we've gone from that to, holy cow, now we're setting baselines, targets, optimization.
We started out as very reactive because we were getting just pummeled left and right with all these requests that we didn't really understand. We kind of picked the ones that we felt were the hottest burning fires at the time. Certainly the green squared standard that we came up with for a manufacturer to be making a green product and a green process was kind of trend setting. You've taken that and run with it to where that's now become sort of the blueprint for other people to put together a certification for manufacturing type of operation. The industry average EPD, I think we were the first flooring product to have anything even similar to that, and still to this day, I don't think that there are industry average or industry developed EPDs that cover their whole section. And then the ingredients disclosure, again, it's been one of those things where because we have a good story to tell, it made sense to, as a industry, get together and say, this is the ingredient that you'll find in a tile. These are the ingredients you'll find in a mortar or grout, because those are conversations where when people start digging in some of the competing products, they don't necessarily come up with the best ingredients that maybe they want to have in their product. So, and then also the life cycle cost assessment that we've updated recently gives people an idea over, it's not just about the initial cost of the product. It's getting the product installed and then maintaining the product. There's a lot of elements to it that I think people don't necessarily immediately think of up front. So yeah, the industry has done a great job positioning itself as a thought leader on a lot of these topics. So in that 15 years, we've kind of come full circle to where now we're starting to lead some of those conversations, which is great. There's still work to be done, though. I think this whole carbon accounting, this whole embodied carbon concept sort of hit us maybe from left field. Maybe it shouldn't have, but it did. It sort of bloomed a year or two ago and has gotten to where it's almost the single focus for just about every group that's having conversations about construction or sustainability in general. So we have to still, I think, do a better job of explaining where we are, where we want to go, and be honest, set some targets, not just for individual companies, but for the whole industry. How are we going to get better? Let's take a look at some innovative ways to reduce that carbon load.
Yeah, I'll talk numbers for just a second. You talked about industry EPDs and really the membership of TCNA buying in and chipping in and volunteering their time and data to develop those documents. But because we're at a tile show, I'll brag a little bit in comparison to an industry-wide EPD that the vinyl industry has. The point we've been making is if you look at those cradle-to-gate manufacturing impacts, our impact is roughly 17, 18 kilograms. If you look at the vinyl industries, they're in the 10 to 11 kilograms, so they're lower than us. But if you look at their service life of anywhere from 15 to 25 years, their embodied carbon over the life of a 75-year building is triple what tiles is. Ours remains at 19 over 75 years. Theirs goes almost to 60 over 75 years. So that's the argument we've been trying to make, and that's based on their data, their reference service life, what they're reporting as an industry, whereas we report 75-year service life because that's the average life of a building in the U.S. They're reporting a fraction of that.
Well, I think the industry is kind of catching up to that. At first it was just putting a piece of paper in a file, and now people are really starting to dig into what are the numbers, what are the impacts, how do I compare them, how do I improve? And for me, it's exciting because, I think we've all been trying to get there. USGBC certainly has put into previous versions of LEED and existing versions of LEED sort of aspirational ideas of where they want to get. And you can see that all kind of coming down to how do we compare tile to vinyl? How do we compare this tile to that tile? Those kind of discussions we have to be prepared to have because that's the information that people are now asking for.
Yeah. So, Wes, you and I were kind of sidebarring on this a few days back, but the industries that are having probably the most similar conversations to us that I can think of are asphalt and concrete. Right. If you look at the Departments of Transportation throughout the states, the federal highways, and also the General Services Administration, GSA, and all of the procured asphalt and concrete products in the country, it's the exact same argument. Concrete has a very, very carbon-intensive production process. Asphalt does too, but not as much. Arguably, concrete, their argument is concrete lasts longer than asphalt. Asphalt doesn't. So if you look at the embodied carbon up front, A1 to A3, as we've been calling it, asphalt wins. If you look at the longevity of a highway and the carbon footprint over time, concrete wins. However, and I'm coming back to my question, still the GSA and the EPA are holding firm. Yeah, but there's too many intangibles here. Let's focus on A1 to A3. So they're rolling with it. Do you have, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any views on behalf of USGBC? Are you hearing similar arguments? Is there somewhere in the middle? Because we got to be thinking about the long run here. We can't just be thinking up front, right? What does USGBC think about this?
And we're pretty agnostic to material choices. So there are uses for concrete, there are uses for asphalt. Usually that's a financial decision because it costs a lot more to, say, do paving out of concrete than out of asphalt for, concrete for a road or something or a parking lot. So there's the kind of financial considerations there. But I think our stance is that no matter what material you're building out of, there are big opportunities for improvement, and you should be comparing against yourself to improve. And something you mentioned, like the old days, right, was recycled content and
Distance.
Regional
manufacturing. That all shows up in your EPD now. Like if you're using recycled content, like good, legitimate recycled content, you're going to have a lower GWP because it shows up in your raw materials. If you're closer by and you don't have as much shipping distances, that's going to show up in your EPD as well. But the big missing piece there is probably electrifying your manufacturing with clean renewables or something like that. That's what the concrete industry and the steel industry, it's another one. They're looking more at like U.S. versus other region-based steel manufacturing as a way to show that our higher quality standards also have lower embodied carbon, and that's part of what the Buy Clean program, right? Let's be honest, that's about buying U.S. It's buying American-made because we have better environmental laws in a lot of cases, and we have cleaner construction industries in some ways. So anyway, long way to get to your question, but I think that every material has a journey to improve, and that's what we want to incentivize because no matter where you're starting, and that's what LEED does, right? We put out these rating systems every 5 years is what we're committing to. Every 5 years we'll have a new one, and we want to ratchet up the requirements every time and to a point where the materials are even carbon storing or carbon neutral, and that's what you're seeing in concrete and steel. They're getting to the point where they're carbon neutral is possible. Not here yet. Carbon storing is even possible. It's kind of at the research phase and kind of the test phase. But maybe that's something to look for this industry.
Thanks. You said something, I think I'm hearing your advice loud and clear to us, the industry, but you said something that resonated, and it reminded me of just good design principles, right? Yeah. In this order, form and function first, cost second, and perhaps sustainability third. Arguably, in some cases, sustainability has gone to the front, which has created inadvertently an unsustainable solution. But so I think your advice is keep doing what we're doing, promote the category on a design basis, on a form and functions basis. Don't decouple the cost conversation from the carbon conversation because they're hand in hand, because you're going to make smart decisions on carbon if you're already making smart decisions on cost because one kind of comes with the other. And so I think I'm hearing, Dan, that's our advice is to keep the whole package together and don't just leverage one over the other.
Yeah, I'll just add, from some of my experience in concrete and asphalt, the GSA and EPA sort of have said that, where they say, by the time we're looking at these GWP values in the tables that they've created, we already know it's an asphalt job. Like we're there. So we've already figured out, or we know it's concrete.
It's a procurement standard. It's not a design standard. A lot of the GSA numbers.
Exactly.
For when you're buying something, you've already designed.
Now, I don't think that argument stands as much in flooring, because I think flooring is kind of picked sometimes based on their carbon targets or their sustainability targets regardless. Now, maybe soft flooring versus hard flooring, the designer's already made that decision. But when you get into the hard category, there's some decisions still to be made, which is kind of what freaks us out as an industry. Are they going to be made based on
Yeah,
the
I don't
wrong
think they've
principles?
really gotten to the finishes side of it yet as much as the structural part of it.
Yeah.
And I think there's some lessons there, and I think this will be some of the content for the flooring summit as well about, the industries have reacted to these ideas of setting numbers and, looking at it by function. One of the concrete and asphalt industries they had different responses to GSA and EPA initially when it was, hey, we want to set a baseline. One industry might have said, no, we're not helping. And the other industry said, cool, we'll collaborate with you, on that. They ended in different levels of happiness at the end of that experience. Regardless, they both ended with a number. And so I think that's an important thing to just pick up is the natural tendency is to sort of resist that and say, oh, no, it's too complicated, we're not going to set a number. But a number will get set. Yeah. The question is, are you part of it or
So
not?
which one was part of it, just out of curiosity? Was it asphalt or concrete? Are you not at liberty to say?
Yeah, I won't go through that.
I will say
We are being very collaborative, though, just for the record, the tile industry.
Yeah, and I want to say as a manufacturer, we have these same internal discussions too, that no manufacturer wants to necessarily disclose the secret sauce that makes their products different than their competitors. So a lot of these same macro ideas are also, what we struggle with day to day internally, explaining sustainability in a way that people can access, telling them what the priorities are and why they need to, spend the money, take the time, invest the resources. So for us, it's good if there's a set, yes, this is a target, even if it's not a target we love, at least then we have something that we can shoot for.
I want to turn to Wes for a second, then I'm going to ask you a similar question. But Wes, being the most outsider of us on stage of the industry, what's your view on the tile industry? What are our biggest opportunities, challenges? How do you view us in this world? Yeah.
I installed my own floor. Awesome. Done it a few times. I think from a durability standpoint, it's obviously a superior product to some of the flimsy stuff, the engineered products that are out there. I mean, we don't really do like real hardwood anymore. It's all engineered. That goes for every part of construction. All of our woods are glue-based and stuff nowadays. So anyway, which have their benefits. They do have lower embodied carbon, and you get the same structural benefits, say, in a wood structure that's got those glue lam beams and things. So anyway, our design systems are going more kind of synthetic. But I think that, tile's it's a great product. And again, I think there are a lot of good stories around the things you've already been doing. But that and I will give you also huge kudos for the work you did to get like a standardized material inventory for all ingredients of tile products. I think that was groundbreaking for all industries, not just flooring. I don't think anyone else has done that. That's kind of been up to each. There's been battles, and it's that old adage: if you're not like at the table, you're on the table, right, for dinner. So you guys have stepped up and been at the table for these things, and I think that bodes well. Others have fought and resisted, and sometimes they win by doing that, but often they don't. And so it's great to see the leadership that you're all taking.
Right. No, thanks for those comments. And that was one of the goals. And Holly Henderson and I were reflecting. She was one of our early speakers back when the industry kind of embarked on this journey. And our goal at that time was to be at the table. And so it's good to hear our efforts to get noticed as high as at the USGBC level and at the EPA. I know we are as well. But similar question, William. I know you, as much work as you do and as instrumental as you've been to our efforts in the tile industry, you also work for the carpet industry. You do some work for the vinyl. You work for the Christmas tree industry.
I do work for the Christmas tree industry, yeah.
Concrete, asphalt, you've done all of it. So, based on kind of your gut feeling, what do we got going for us and what do we need to work on?
Yeah, that's a great. I think the analogy I sort of use for it, there's a different feeling in terms of how you sort of talk about yourself, right? If I went around or you went around and said, I'm a better man than William Paddock, there's a connotation that comes from that, right? It's, I could say I'm a bigger man than Bill Greasy, and, that could mean multiple things.
And I'm a bigger man than William Pat.
Right. So that the way you sort of say that can communicate differently, right? It's boastful. It's boastful. You're trying to position yourselves on top of things versus a different feeling, which is I'm just trying to become a better version of me. Like I'm trying to get better. I could lose a few pounds. I could have one less bourbon a night. Things I could be better, right? And I think that would be the spirit that I would sort of encourage is like the hardest thing with manufacturing and talking about decarbonization is it's a lot of work to figure out what that transition is. Just figuring out how each manufacturer can be a better version of itself. And then even like amongst the tile industry compete on that and be okay with that like we're just all trying to get better together. I think that's a much more powerful message than I'm better than you, right? That collectively we're all trying to become the best versions of ourselves. So I think that spirit is sort of what I kind of try to capture is, tile makes sense in so many applications, and I think as embodied carbon decision making matures, I think the tile versus vinyl or tile versus carpet or tile versus just a bare concrete floor, which is going to win against all of them, is to talk about there's still a role for design, there's still a role for aesthetic, there's still a role for function, and then talk about how you can make that function the least impactful possible so that people don't feel guilty about it. And I think the connecting the space to belief that it's real is the hardest part. I think if tile can get that right, where architects, designers, purchasers look at this space and say like, yeah, they collaborate, they try, they're doing good stuff. I think it won't even be a competition.
So I think this segues nicely, and I want Dan to comment a little bit on this. I do think we're making a strong effort to be a leader and not to, there's a fine line between just being boastful but actually showing real leadership. And one of the things, and as you see, there's some place cards or some centerpieces on the table with a QR code. And one of the things the tile industry was doing, I want you to speak on, is putting our competitive hats aside and inviting the entire flooring industry to DC for a summit. And please visit floringsummit.com. It's the Flooring Sustainability Summit. But Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about what that is, when it is?
The neat thing, or I guess maybe the frustrating thing, we started this well before COVID. So the idea wasn't to do it in 2024. It was to do it a few years ago so we could be further along. But the great thing is it's finally materialized. And to Bill's point, it would have been fairly easy for us to say, okay, we're going to get the tile industry together. We're all going to talk about sustainability and get each other excited. And what actually made more sense was to get the flooring industry together and talk about sustainability. And to William's point, it's not about who's the biggest, who's the baddest. It's all about how do we get better collectively. And the speaker list that you've set up is astounding. I'm thrilled that the magnitude of the people that are willing to come and talk to the whole group realize that the flooring industry needs to hear the message that they're giving out. And I'm excited to go. I'm excited to attend. I'm excited to be a sponsor. And again, it gets back to this whole idea of get involved. If you're not involved with TCNA's Green Initiative Committee, get involved, because we're doing good things. And I think the Flooring Summit is just kind of the latest iteration of what we're doing to really promote not just tile, but the whole flooring space.
Yeah, so imagine this conversation here stretched out over a day and a half with 200 to 300 people in the room, and included in that room is the Chief Advocacy Officer for AIA, the CEO of IIDA, the President of U.S. Green Building Council, and the President and CEO of the Green Building Initiative. Those are our opening keynotes, and that's the audience we get at this, and we're excited. And then we're also working with the EPA will be there, the GSA, all the policy-making groups, even members of Congress will be there July 17th and 18th in Washington, D.C. And the goal is dialogue. Everyone that attends is encouraged to share views, learn something, network with one another. The tile industry and the greater flooring industry, this is co-hosted by the North American Laminate Flooring Association, the Natural Stone Institute, TCNA, as well as the National Wood Flooring Association, NWFA. We've also invited the carpet and vinyl industries to come as well, and many companies from those sectors are participating as sponsors and will be there in attendance. So we're really opening the doors to the entire flooring industry so that we can share our opportunities and challenges with one another, and to your point, William, get better within our own fields, but also not fight so much on the basis of sustainability, encourage one another to be the best versions of themselves from an industry standpoint. So we're excited. We appreciate USGBC being at the table there for the discussion, and it'll be, again, a day and a half of dialogue, not just on embodied carbon, but on human health, as well as LEED V5 and other green building standards.
And if you are coming, and I encourage you to come, you know, the important conversations, yeah, what happens up on stage is great, but it's also those interactions you can have behind the scenes. And so I really encourage you to kind of reach out to somebody you don't know, figure out what you have in common, have those conversations. Chances are they can introduce you to somebody that can introduce you to somebody that you really need to know.
So any closing thoughts, or should we open up for questions? What do you guys think? We got time for some questions from the group. If you guys want to engage, please.
20 or so years ago, interface carpet was like the leader. I don't know, maybe West used to talk on it. You know about interface carpet?
Yeah.
Are they still recognized as a
20, 30 years ago, Interface was a big sustainability. Yeah, they had a very strong message. They even had a product where you could lease your flooring, so the manufacturer would take it back at end of life. The idea was you don't really want, like you as a building owner don't want necessarily carpet, you want the service the carpet provides you, and we will take that back at end of life and recycle it. And they were recycled content and all that. They also, I think, revolutionized the tiles, right? Carpet tile kind of system, which has become the de facto kind of modern carpet systems. So they're still definitely a leader. They're a big leader. They have some of the greenest, they call actually a carbon storing product, where their backing has some of these carbon sequestering materials in it. It's still a little bit of interesting science to me. I'm going to lean on him to see how real it is. But the idea is that they have actually carbon neutral carpets, and they've also opened up some factories to take back and recycle carpet. All that said, and since they're not here, their fastest growing kind of segment of their business is their luxury vinyl tile. So all the carpeting pretty much, and they're not here, right? A lot of them, they've all kind of gone into resilient flooring. That seems to be sort of the big dominant flooring type. Carpet still has its place for sure, and it's kind of a use application thing where you need the cushion and the acoustics and things. But a lot of the hard stuff, they're investing heavily in resilient.
Yeah. And I'll add, even if they are here, I'm happy to say that we totally value and respect the accomplishments. They've forged a path in building interiors that we're all trying to emulate. To that end, we anticipate them being a participant in our summit. They've been invited. We've been in conversation. So Interface, given their brand recognition in the field of sustainability, would be a huge player to have, just to pick their brain a little bit, because they're as much progress as they've made, they have much to gain from the A1 to A3 conversation. However, we know that what's important to them is circularity in the full life cycle. So I would be fascinated to pick their brain a little bit on how do you stick to your principles while still kind of exploiting a system that the government's kind of putting in place right now? I don't know if William, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll add one other perspective. I think they seized an early opportunity in sort of recognizing that with their EPDs that they were a disclosure. The manufacturer makes their own disclosure, and one of the sort of revolutionary things they did was they started to report individually on every face weight. So normally when you do an EPD, we average products together and come up with a representative product, and then we publish it. And so they broke theirs out by individual face weights, and what happened is the carbon footprint of the product really had a wide range, and it had different data points. So play that out is when you go to like a EC3 or something like that and look, you have to go like 3 or 4 pages deep if you search from low to high to find a manufacturer other than Interface when you search from low to high. They basically SEO'd the whole idea of how people would they're the first 4 pages of Google. But really they just got really granular in how they're managing their disclosures out into the marketplace. And so I think that's a really big lesson for manufacturers is, it's unlike testing, right? Testing, you send off a product and you get results back. There's not a lot of strategy necessarily in testing. This is a disclosure. You could report one product, you could report them individually, you could report them as an average, but there's consequences for these decisions in terms of your disclosure strategies. And I think that's a great opportunity for everybody. Is if you think there's opportunities to disclose more granular products in different EPDs, that's going to help you with the architect design conversation to show that you have products below a threshold. So they really are to thank or to blame, depending on how you want to look at that, for kind of daylighting that. And if you go look now, all the major carpet companies disclose by face weight, and it's shrunk the field of how different they are. Early, it looked massively different, and it was a disclosure strategy.
So you kind of want it's helpful then to grow and diversify the portfolio of EPDs. Just you don't put all your eggs in one line item basket.
Yeah, I was just starting to say, William has worked with me for years on EPDs, and one of the innovative things that WAP does is try to figure out a way to maximize the amount of disclosure we can do without maximizing the amount of the check, which isn't always the case when you're dealing with some of these environmental companies. So he's been a good advocate for the industry and also finding innovative ways to disclose this kind of information in a way that people can access.
Right. Yep. We got just 2 or 3 more minutes. Time for another one. Okay. If not, then it's been a real pleasure. Any further thoughts from the group?
One thing I did want to say, and I don't know what the mix is of folks here in the audience, but listen to your youngest employees. They're quite often the ones that have the biggest ideas in this realm. I think we tend to, as companies, sometimes think, we got this, we know this, but they're the ones that really have the driving passion and see the need and the urgency for a lot of these kind of initiatives. So, sometimes it has to be top side up, where these ideas are coming from people other than the top layer of management.
So that's why Green Build is always such a fun party, then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, don't listen to them at like 1 a.m. But the next morning about 10:30, they're good to go.
Yeah.
My last word would just be keep what you're doing, keep doing what you're doing. And we are in a race to help preserve the climate change that's already happened. Like stop it, reverse it. We're in a race against the clock. So if you got good ideas and bold ideas, we want to reward you for it through our rating system, and just keep doing it. That will be continually rewarded by the industry, by designers. Architects want it. Build it in. As you heard, governments want these things. Policymakers, owners, building owners, real estate portfolio owners now, they care about these topics.
Great.
So keep doing it.
Yeah, I know on behalf of Dan and myself and our entire industry, really, Wes, we really appreciate USGBC's openness to work with us and support that you guys have provided over the year. It's been invaluable, and same to you, William. The work you've done for our industry has been, I think it's paying dividend. We're starting to see the fruits of our labor for sure, so we'll just keep this thing moving forward. So thank you, gentlemen, and it's been a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.